Good afternoon to you. 5:06 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, 5:30, Mark Paoletta is with us. He will chat with us about the latest attacks on Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, and not just on him, but on the entire United States Supreme Court. Very important stories that we need to pay attention to on that branch of government. Mark will join us with the details. And you can talk to us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. It really does. Doesn't it feel like the 2024, at least Republican primary, it kind of moved this past week, in particular because you had the Family Leader Summit on Friday where each of the Republican presidential candidates were subjected to a round of questioning from Tucker Carlson. Not all of them prevailed in that line of questioning. Some of them, I think, just set what remnants of their campaign exists still on fire. But others performed admirably. And then you had Donald Trump over the weekend at the Turning Point Action Summit. We're looking at all sorts of new information coming in on how the candidates are doing. Donald Trump remains the very clear frontrunner at this moment on the right. For more on all of this, I want to turn to Josh Kraushaar. He's the editor-in-chief of Jewish Insider and the author of Axios' Sunday Sneak newsletter. Josh, great to have you back with us, sir.
Vince, great to be with you.
Am I wrong? It does feel like this past weekend was a kind of a big kickoff moment for this primary fight.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's kind of spring training for political candidates, and that they're going to Iowa, they're testing their messages, they're having a big debate. That might be opening day in August when Fox has the first debate between all the Republican candidates, at least those who show up. But yeah, like this is game time. We're in the summer months before the election. Trump has a pretty commanding lead in the primary polls, and this is a chance for everyone else to make a name for themselves and really stake out their differences and then lay out their policies.
Yes, it seems to me that the only guy that I'm seeing who's moving in a positive direction, but he's still in the single digits, he's Vivek Ramaswamy. There was a new survey today finding him at 7% support. That's not much. I mean, Donald Trump is way, way up there. Number 2 is Ron DeSantis, but he's heading in the wrong direction, Josh. Why is that?
Yeah, well, look, he got all the hype. He had all the money. And, he hasn't executed the way a lot of people were hoping for. Some of it is because Trump has gone after him very aggressively from the get-go. Some of it has been because he's just not been the most charismatic candidate who connects with the audiences in Iowa and New Hampshire in the first couple months of his campaign. But look, I mean, that's why they play the games, and he has time to turn around his campaign. But it is very unusual, Vince. Usually when you launch your campaign, you get to put your best face forward, you get to show the skills you have, the message you have for the country, and usually you get a bounce. Usually you get a little bit of a bump after you announce your campaign. DeSantis is one of the few candidates I can remember, at least of that significance, who actually lost ground after his announcement. In fact, we all remember he went, or maybe we forget, that he went on Twitter and it all glitched up, and it was a kind of an embarrassing launch. And ever since then, everything has really gone downhill for the Florida governor. And look, he has a good story to tell. He's got a lot of key supporters in key states. Like, he has a lot of things going for him, but he just, to this point, hasn't quite executed yet.
His record in Florida has been awesome. It's the kind of thing any candidate would want to run on. But here's the issue. DeSantis' argument is, if you like Trump, you're going to love Trump with competence, right? That's the claim that he's essentially trying to say in so many words. But if his argument is that he's a more competent version of Trump, the failure at the launch of the campaign, although, of course, you can blame Elon Musk, but look, this is the big decision he made, is meaningful. But more importantly now, if you're looking at the hiring question, well, I'm going to hire better than Trump. Well, that's interesting because in the last 24 hours, we just found out that he's firing a dozen of his earliest campaign staffers because it's time to retool the campaign. That sends kind of a worrying signal to people who are considering these men.
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the worrisome signs early on for people kind of reporting and kind of dealing with all the campaigns was that the Trump operation was actually quite a bit more professional than we've dealt with in the past. Have a lot of really, really savvy people.
I've heard it's the best. I've heard it's the best Trump campaign yet, actually.
Well, and I think there's truth to that. I mean, we have two other campaigns to judge against, including when he ran for re-election in 2020. Whereas I think DeSantis is sort of, you can kind of compare it to the New York Mets, where they have the big payroll, the big names, the big staff, the super PAC. But you need to execute. You need to sometimes having the biggest free agents or the biggest amount of money it doesn't help you get a message for your campaign. It doesn't help you stay with the right talking points and have the argument that connects with the most voters.
Right.
So, I mean, DeSantis is kind of like the New York Mets of baseball, the team that spent a lot of money, had the hype in the preseason. And, yeah, look, there's time to turn it around just like there is in baseball season right now. But it's not looking good. It's not looking good when you have to lay off staff this early on, that you're spending so much money and not getting return for that investment. Again, there's time to turn it around, but we're getting closer and closer to the point where you need to see some gain in the polls. You need to see DeSantis getting momentum.
Now, it does feel foolish to ever cement any of your notions about what the future looks like based on the present this far out from an election. I will grant, and we are, as you point out, now just a month away from that first Republican primary debate. There is still time for this math to change, isn't there?
Oh, of course. I mean, we've seen plenty of candidates that were ruled out in the summer and turn things around, but we've probably seen more candidates that look like they're in trouble and they don't turn it around. So, look, I don't think the odds are great for DeSantis, especially where things stood, a year ago or 6 months ago.
Right.
But look, there's time. I mean, there's plenty of time to turn things around. I think one of the challenges, just organizationally, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds here, but DeSantis kind of made the bet that a lot of the money that people were giving to his campaign would be stored in the super PAC. So there's all the money, a lot of the money that DeSantis' operation is raising is money he doesn't control. It's done by an outside entity. And that's fairly unusual in the kind of modern history of presidential politics. Usually, if you're the candidate, you want to manage your staff. You want to manage the money. You want to manage what your message is on the airwaves. And you have a lot of cooks in the kitchen with this DeSantis operation, where there is a lot of money going in, but you have some of it going to the campaigns, a lot more going to the super PAC. You have different strategists with different ideas, and it's just not very cohesive. And that's sort of, to extend that baseball analogy, it's like being with a team with a lot of superstars that are past their prime, perhaps getting paid a lot of money, but don't have the formula to get things together and start winning games.
So while we're on this issue of DeSantis and what he can do for his campaign, I've been saying for a while that he really needs to subject himself to the types of adversarial interviews that catch fire in the Republican base, where conservatives see that and they say, good for you for going into the lion's den and fighting for what you actually believe in. Vivek Ramaswamy has had some success doing that. This is why people like him, in addition to his capabilities as a speaker on the stump. Donald Trump clearly did that in 2016. He dove headlong into adversarial media, mixed it up, and thrilled Republican audiences. So DeSantis is set to do a CNN interview tomorrow with Jake Tapper. I saw that Brian Griffin, who is a spokesman for DeSantis, said this in a statement, quote, "There are people within the media who are still seeking the truth. We will engage with them, and we're looking forward to getting our message out there to the American people." Treating Jake Tapper as a kind of guy who's, quote, still seeking the truth. Kind of seems to me like the DeSantis campaign kind of wants it both ways. They sort of want to play nice with Jake Tapper and then simultaneously say, look how tough we're being. What's going on here?
Well, look, if that was the case, they should have been doing interviews since when he launched his campaign. They should have sat down with the nightly newscast. They should have sat down with Jake Tapper. They should have sat down with all the networks if that was the case. Clearly, that wasn't their philosophy for a long time. Right. Now they're doing a course correction. I think they're making the right decision, by the way. Donald Trump isn't afraid of the media. Sometimes Republicans get the most political points when they go on, Meet the Press, or they go on a Sunday show, or they go on Jake Tapper show, and they actually fight back. And they actually, Vivek Ramaswamy has done that. And he's gotten some attention for that. Newt Gingrich back in, remember the 2012 debate where he went after John King of CNN at that debate and won South Carolina because of it. So this notion that you shouldn't be going on mainstream news shows, I mean, if you're such a good fighter, if you're so good at kind of making the case for yourself, you shouldn't be afraid of anyone on a mainstream news network. And I think that's what he's realized. Unfortunately for DeSantis, it's kind of late in the game to make that kind of significant of a philosophical change.
Yes. I think what happens sometimes in these campaigns is they get confused about what their relationship with these more left-wing news outlets are supposed to be, right? Because my view, and speaking as somebody who comes from the conservative media world, and specifically in conservative journalism, we'd always get frustrated when, say, the Trump campaign or the Trump White House would give some scoop to the New York Times. And I'd be sitting back going, they're going to mangle it, idiots. You're handing them this great thing. They're going to turn it into some distorted vision of events. It's not going to be representative of what's actually going on. And it would drive us nuts as a competitive news organization that wanted good scoops. That does not mean don't talk to the New York Times. That's not what it means.
Right.
That means
Right.
those are two different things. Scoops, give it to me. And then the actual mixing it up, battling, go on live television, battle it out with adversarial media.
I think it's a great point, Vince. And I think the DeSantis operation saw every media that wasn't conservative media, and they wanted to hit it with a hammer. Everything was a nail.
Yes.
I mean, look, I think you need to have a sophisticated toolbox. You can give scoops to the Daily Caller or to Breitbart or to conservative outlets. You can talk to Fox News and spend more time on Fox News. That's smart media strategy. But not to be afraid. I mean, I think there was a point where it looked like he was afraid of going on any of the main, any of the other news networks, when Donald Trump actually has done quite a few interviews lately with CNN and with other mainstream outlets, with other traditional news outlets.
Yeah.
So, I mean, look, I think Trump almost outshined. I mean, the Trump is his biggest rival. He's the front runner, and he's the one who's going on CNN doing the town hall and actually getting a lot of political points from that exchange.
No question. Can you talk a little bit about the money race here for a moment? I saw that Biden put up these massive fundraising numbers last week that outpaced both Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis by a meaningful margin. He seems to have a lot of money flowing in. Do we know who's funding his campaign and its outside groups?
Well, Biden put up a big number. That includes money that was raised also for the Democratic National Committee. So if you actually look at Trump's numbers in his first reelection and Obama's numbers in his first reelection, Biden is actually notably behind in the fundraising. That said, Republicans have also had some challenges on the fundraising front. DeSantis actually raised the most money among, in the campaign account, and he actually has a lot more money in the super PAC. So he's doing well on the fundraising side. Where a lot of people are concerned is that the most money he raised was like the first week of his campaign, and he hasn't kept up the pace the rest of the period. So that's a red flag. He's spending a lot of that money, so he's not bringing in enough to kind of make up for that expenditure. And now he's firing staff, so he seems to acknowledge that the fundraising isn't where he wants it to be. So DeSantis, on one hand, has actually raised the most money for his campaign account, but there are a lot of warning signs along with those numbers. But look, Vince, look at all the other Republican candidates. None of them have raised huge amounts of money. They're red flags all over. Yeah. I mean, Tim Scott has a lot of money to spend, but a lot of it was transferred from his Senate campaign account. Didn't raise a huge amount this past quarter. Mike Pence didn't raise anything to speak of, a little over $1 million. Haley, not keeping pace from the last quarter. So, I mean, look, you can name all, and even Ramaswamy, who's had a pretty good couple months, spent most of the money he raised was his own money. He wrote checks to himself.
Yes.
So, look, Republicans have had an issue raising money, especially from small dollar donors. I think Trump has done the best job in the party on that front, but everyone else seems to be having trouble keeping pace. Let
me switch topics real quick with you. The Congresswoman from Washington, Democrat Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, was speaking to a group of, they call themselves Free Palestine protesters, and she said this over the weekend.
Can I say something? Can I say something as somebody that's been in the streets and has participated in a lot of demonstrations? I want you to know that we have been fighting to make it clear that Israel is a racist state, that the Palestinian people deserve self-determination and autonomy, that the dream of a two-state solution is slipping away from us.
You heard her there say Israel is a racist state. There's been a flurry of condemnation, including from her fellow Democrats today. What's happening here?
Yeah, well, when you have a lawmaker say she spends so much time in the streets, that's a warning sign. Not spending time in Congress and spending time on the streets is a sign that you're on the left wing of the party. And she was trying to placate some. But she's been critical of Israel and been anti-Israel before. She's made a lot of comments that have raised eyebrows and given a lot of other Democrats heartburn before. But look, this was a new level of hostility to Israel. She quickly backtracked the next day. You have many, many Democrats, including those in leadership, who don't mention Jayapal by name, but clearly rebuke everything she said at that address. Look, we've talked about this on the show before, Vince, but there's a big divide among the Democrats over Israel, where a majority of Democrats support the state of Israel, think it's absurd and even anti-Semitic what she said at that event. But there's a loud minority of lawmakers, the Squad and Jayapal, who leads the House Progressive Caucus, that have very different views. And they've basically been trying to paper it over by criticizing what she said without actually saying her name. But she represents Vince, over 100 House and Senate Democrats in Congress.
Yeah.
And look, they should be put on record on whether they actually agree with her and what kind of, if she should be censured, what should be said in response to her comments and her role as head of the most important progressive caucus in Congress.
I remember this playing out with Ilhan Omar in a similar way, because there was a resolution to condemn her, and then it was watered down to basically nothing by the Democrat majority, although they sort of wanted to criticize her without saying her name.
Yeah, I mean that's the playbook, and you look, I will give the House Democratic leadership credit in that they quickly did say these remarks they quickly said the opposite of what Jayapal said, in implying that these remarks were unacceptable and frankly anti-Semitic. But they haven't gone so far as to say Jayapal should not be head of a congressional progressive caucus, that she shouldn't be leading such a significant body within the Democratic Party by holding these views. Josh
Kraushaar, editor-in-chief of Jewish Insider, author of Axios' Sunday Sneak newsletter. Josh, good to have you with us again, sir. Thank you. Our WMAL colleague, Matt Walsh, tweeting out today something that Barack Obama put. He shared something and added some commentary to it. But Obama today put out a letter to all of the hardworking librarians of America. And, this is the frame that the left keeps on advancing, that the right is trying to ban books. Never mind the fact that it's the left that's been trying to ban great classics like To Kill a Mockingbird. Like, the left would not be pleased if you started mandating readings of 1984. That, they wouldn't really be on board with that. They'd burn that book in a second. But Obama out there today saying that some of the books that shaped his life are being banned. Like what? Like Lawn Boy or Genderqueer, or what books are you talking about? Matt Walsh suggested that he should be a little bit more specific about which books shaped his life. And then he tweeted, actually, never mind. Don't answer that. It's 5:29. Good afternoon to you. 5:35 here. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us today at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. The left despises the United States Supreme Court, especially when it rules in favor of the United States Constitution. And they especially loathe Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. They have very racist assumptions about him, and it's really unfortunate because he's a great man with his head on right about the Constitution in this great country. So, of course, they attack him. Here's an example of that. Here's Minnesota Democrat Attorney General Keith Ellison. You may remember him from his time in Congress. Here he is over the weekend attacking Clarence Thomas.
Well, Clarence Thomas, anybody who's watched the movie Django, just watch Stephen and you see Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas has decided that his best personal interest is siding with the powerful and the special interests, and regardless as to who they're going to hurt. He's like, I'm looking out for me, and I don't care nothing about you. But I'm on the Supreme Court, so it's my job to look out for you. So he's abdicating his responsibility. He has abdicated a long time ago. When he got in office, he was this way. He's this way now. Maybe he's worse now. So Clarence Thomas needs to be impeached. Clarence Thomas is illegitimate and has no basis in the job that he's in. And it's a lesson to us as African Americans. Mm. What is the lesson? We all thought, well, he's a black man raised in the Deep South. He knows what racism, segregation is. He knows what affirmative action is. He's going to come around one day. Understand that it's not a matter of pigment. It's not what's on your skin. It's what's in your mind.
Yeah. But his position, Keith Ellison's position, is your skin color should dictate the way you think. What do we call that theory? If you say that someone's skin color should dictate the way they think. There's a word for that. Let's bring in Mark Paoletta. He's a partner at the law firm Schaerr Jaffe. He's the author of the book, Created Equal, Clarence Thomas in His Own Words. And he joins us now. Mark, good to have you with us.
Hey, Vince. Thanks for having me on.
So here you have the top prosecutor in the state of Minnesota comparing Clarence Thomas to a fictional house slave. What are we to make of this?
You know, that Clarence Thomas triggers the left, and he really triggers the black leadership. And we saw this like last year, Vince, right, when Hakeem Jeffries attacked me for saying that the left hates Clarence Thomas, right, because he's a black conservative who's never bowed to the left and what they think a black man should think because of the color of his skin. And he went ballistic, if you remember. Now, the funny thing is, right, is that Keith Ellison, Hakeem Jeffries, Benny Thompson, who would call Justice Thomas an Uncle Tom in another crazed, unhinged moment, right? If you look at the issues, right, black Americans agree with Clarence Thomas like wildly much more than these gentlemen,
yes.
Right? Affirmative action. You just saw the Washington Post story last week, right? Stunning, right? But we know these facts are real. That black Americans are against affirmative action in education admissions, right? They are for school choice. 81% of black parents support school choice, right? Why? Because it's the way out to a better life. And guess what? The NAACP opposes school choice, as I'm sure Keith Ellison and Benny Thompson and Hakeem Jeffries do. Voter ID, black Americans in the high 60%. Abortion, right? Black Americans support a ban on third-term trimesters, along with white Americans. I think it's the same percentage, right? Only 28% of black Americans were for defund the police. All of these things I just mentioned, right, are all gospel, right, to the black leadership. They're the sellouts. And why is that? Because they get lots of money from what the historically racist, right, majority white labor unions, right, who give them money. If you look at the NAACP annual report, lots of money comes from those organizations. And so it's really rich, right, that Keith Ellison is laying out this garbage. And here's the last thing, though, right, Vince, as we've talked about before. Clarence Thomas has been on the Supreme Court for more than 30 years. He has more than, I think, 750 opinions now, right? He is the intellectual leader of the Supreme Court. After, as he talked about when he first went on the bench, right? They laughed at him, they mocked him, they defamed him. And what did Clarence Thomas do? He got to work, and guess what? He's changed, right, the face of American jurisprudence, and he will long be remembered, long into the future, when Keith Ellison is long forgotten.
Yeah, he'll be a footnote. So on your point, you just made me think of it, I'm not even certain you've heard this audio, but I just want to play it for you real quickly. Congresswoman Cori Bush of Missouri was a part of a pro-abortion event today, very enthusiastically pro-abortion, and she said that not allowed. So let me see if I can understand this. I'm going to play the audio, and then I'll summarize what we think we just heard. Here's Cori Bush.
Okay.
Despite what the anti-abortion movement says, abortion, it is not uncommon. It is not complicated. It's not dangerous. But what's actually dangerous, what's really dangerous, is forcing people, especially black women, to give birth.
So it is really dangerous for especially black babies to be born, says Congresswoman Cori Bush. I mean, this is as cruel and demented as it gets. And it goes right to the point you were making a moment ago. She is enthusiastically for something that the rest of the country is not.
Yeah, Vince, the left has just jumped the shark, right? I mean, they're just out and out, just crazy now, and it's sad, and it's disgusting. And so, yes, the great majority of American people disagree, black or white, disagree with Cori Bush, and the problem is that they are the black leadership, right? And Cori Bush falls every single one of those issues I mentioned. I'm sure she falls right in line with Keith Ellison, right? And so it's
can I say though that we refer to them as black leadership. They're treated that way by the media. They're treated as if they're in a position of some sort of leadership over black Americans broadly, when that's not true in any way.
I agree with that, and so it's the historically this however you want to define it, the historically considered civil rights groups, or the black leadership, yes, and I do think there are other Black Americans like Clarence Thomas that are the true leaders, out there, and others that are, that are pushing back against this narrative, right? That is accepted by the media, is accepted. They're always shocked, right? I talked to a reporter the other day that Black Americans are against affirmative action. They just about fell out of their seat.
Well, that's right? Because they're against racial prejudice, like normal thinking people. And that's what affirmative action is. It's a euphemism for racial prejudice in hiring and advancement. And so when you tell people the basics, when you're like, hey, this is what it's about, they're opposed to it because Americans are fundamentally decent people, Mark Paoletta.
Yeah, and I would urge all of your listeners, one of the most powerful and beautiful decisions written, in a very, very long time is Justice Thomas's concurrence in the Harvard case. And it's a point by point. It takes on every single argument over the past 30 years that he's been making, right, and lays it all out in one opinion. And it is must reading for anyone who cares about these issues and cares about the court and the rule of law, but also just about these issues. And he just dissects them as he's been doing for 30 years. And guess what? He's the justice who wrote the dissent in Grutter. Right? There's no other justice on the court from the Michigan v. Grutter case in 2003 when they said, oh, maybe affirmative action won't be needed. Race-based affirmative action won't be needed in 25 years, right? That was O'Connor's little bone to throw, right? And what do they do now? They come to the court. I was at the oral argument, and they say, oh no, we need it indefinitely, right? This is the game that's played, and Clarence Thomas has been calling out for 30 years, and guess what?
Yes.
By his force of argument, he has convinced, right, 6 justices to say this is wrong, this is odious, and this is unconstitutional. And God bless him. He's our greatest justice. He's our greatest living American. And when you hear these attacks, right, that he has to live with, right, and he just keeps plowing ahead, and is unbowed by it, he is a hero. And you see it. And
the left often defaults to the support for its own position doesn't need to be grounded in any sort of merit-based or intellectual approach. It can be based on something called lived experience, where they say, well, I just have an experience that you could never have because of your race and gender. So therefore, you should listen to me as a professional on this subject. That's basically the source of the argument. Have you noticed they don't use that argument for Clarence Thomas's opinions, that his, quote, lived experience doesn't support any conclusions he comes to?
Right. It's he just triggers them. They don't, they've been trying to destroy him since the day he, was nominated. And on every level, nothing's worked. You're seeing it now with this crazy ethics bill that the Democrats are going to pick up this week. Yes. It's all aimed kind of at Clarence Thomas and a couple other justices who are great justices like Alito and Gorsuch and have kind of come into this sort of this smear job. But it's really Clarence Thomas, and it's not going to make any difference. They're not going to pass this bill or enact this bill 100%. And it's just to try and destroy, again, now that he's the leader of the court and he's got these majority opinions, they want to burn the court down. And we've talked about this before, but that's what they want to do. The left wants to burn the Supreme Court down and destroy it because it no longer is their playpen to enact things like abortion, right? They could never enact at a national level. That they had this, whether it was Republicans or Democrat presidents, they always picked justices that always turned out to be liberal. Yeah. and now it's a court faithful to the Constitution, and it's driving the left crazy. And the interesting thing, right? The three opinions at the very end of the term, right? The Christian website designer, the student loan forgiveness, wildly unpopular, and the affirmative action are all things that were very, very popular with the American people. So,
yes.
The left doesn't know what to do. All they can do is try and smear the court with these bogus ethics allegations.
Also, there was, even earlier in that very week where we got all those great decisions that were pro-liberty, the court made a decision that favored with basically the lefty position on elections in North Carolina, in the state of North Carolina, because there was a push to say, hey, look, the only people who can change election law, as explained in the Constitution, would be the state legislature. The court ruled on the left side of this question earlier in the week, and all I heard was some grumbles of gratitude, maybe, and then they moved on like that never happened.
Right. Right. Well, the court's been by and large very good, been excellent. I think the best court, the past two terms have been the best terms in the past. Take your number, 50, 70 years, and I also think, Vince, that these attacks on the court have galvanized the court and these justices. And I think that
you think
it's
so?
A
You think it's
court.
it's made them more resolved in honoring their commitment to the Constitution?
I do, and I also think so you're not going to get justices to I think on the what I'll call the originals conservative, yes, okay. I also think that they realize the entire court is under attack, and I think they have in some ways come together even more, and you're seeing that when the court issued the ethics principles, right, that all 9 justices signed. So it is sort of an institution versus institution, and as I pointed out in some of my writings, Congress is the biggest hypocrite of all, right? They're trying to enforce recusal laws, additional recusal laws on the court, right? They're already subject to a recusal law, right? 28 U.S.C. 455, and the Congress doesn't have any recusal law. In fact, members of Congress, senators, representatives are allowed to vote on legislation and work on matters that directly affect their financial interests or their spouse's financial interest, or their spouse's client's financial interest, right? In the executive branch, you'd go to jail for that, right? In the courts, you're required to recuse from that. But in Congress, you can do that, right? You can get rich doing that and claim, you're doing it for your constituents. So Congress is at 16%, okay, approval. Okay, 60. 60. There was one poll that had them at 75% disapproval. That's who needs to be changed right now.
100%.
Is Congress.
So, and also, I should point out that none of the hysterics around the Supreme Court that the left has been kicking up have yielded an actual scandal of any kind. And all of it is just, it's meant to be the appearance of scandal. When you have people like Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas going out of his way to make sure to honor every disclosure requirement he's supposed to, doing it with dutifully. And they're coming along saying, well, he's not telling you about this other thing and this other friend he's gotten that kind of. It's all meant to be the appearance of scandal because what they're trying to do is undermine the legitimacy of the court. It's not actually about benefiting the public interest. I can bet you today that by and large, the court probably doesn't even care. Like, okay, impose more disclosure requirements. They probably don't even care about that other than the harassment that might ensue, which obviously would be an issue. But the idea of of staying abreast of ethics obligations, my guess is the court doesn't mind that at all.
No, not. You know what? Just as Thomas said when he issued a statement, I've complied, done my best to comply in good faith with all the recusal laws or all the disclosure laws, right? And now that they're changed, I will comply with them too. So, and again, this dishonesty, particularly of ProPublica, where they wrote this story about these trips of Justice Thomas with his good friend Harlan Crow. And you know what? Those allegations were made in 2011, right, by 20 members of Congress and some left-wing groups who filed a complaint with the Judicial Conference on the exact same allegations, right? And the conference said, you don't need to change your financial disclosure form, Justice Thomas. So it's, and they don't mention that in the article, right? So they completely leave that out. Dishonest reporting or sloppy reporting or whatever it is. They didn't mention that. So these issues have been, the justices have complied with it, just like Justice Alito has. These crazy attacks on Justice Gorsuch, right, where he sold his home to an LLC he was in. He absolutely complied with the law. You saw this crazy story about a Christmas party, right, that Justice Thomas was hosting, and allegations that people were paying him through his court aid through Venmo. I mean, they've gone insane in trying to tear the court down and just make their life miserable, right? That's part of this, is to intimidate them, to make their life miserable and go after their friendships, right? If you think about, totalitarian states, where they target your friendships so you grow weaker. That's where you draw your strength. And so that's what they're doing with these attacks on the justices and their friends. My belief, they're all strong and they're getting stronger and they're seeing what's happened. And I can't wait for next term, right? And this court to carry on. Justice Thomas has been on the court for 32 years, the longest serving justice ever. is 30, a little bit over 36 years, I think.
Yes.
He's 75 years old. He's going to serve many, many more years. And so he's just getting started, in my view. And now that he's got this majority of justices that are in sync with him, I think you're going to see a lot of decisions that will bring, the American, republic back to the founder's vision and the Constitution.
I hope so. But what we've learned is the more decent you are, the more they'll try and destroy you. I mean, in fact, it's basically biblical at this point. The more righteous you are, the more persecution you'll be subjected to. Thank you very much, Mark Paoletta. Always so nice to talk to you, sir. Thank you. Is the Mexican government friend or foe? We dig in tomorrow on the Vince Coglianese Show. The great one, Mark Levin, up next.